Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Jabez Experience. My name is Helen V. Hicks. I'm a licensed professional counselor, parent coach, author, podcaster, mother of five, a whole list of things. And I am happy to be one of your hosts. And my co host, Curtis, will introduce himself.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you, Helen. As Helen stated, my name is Curtis Brooks. I am a men's life coach. I specialize in transformational leadership for men. So I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Curtis. So, our topic for tonight is one of Curtis's selections, and it is men creating a stable environment. I think we're going to have a lovely discussion.
I'm excited about this topic because uh, through the course of life and just the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of life, I have absolutely learned a lot, and I have learned what my position is, or where I'm supposed to be at, and here at my ripe young age, but not so really young age. uh, it's been a journey, and so this topic here is I found just very important to me, and I think the title is absolutely fitting for our conversation today. And so, as men, we're creating a stable environment. Again, I've had to really just dive deep into this conversation because I wasn't always there as a man. I didn't know how to. I didn't know what that meant. Initially, being raised by a single mom for many years, my mom did marry, and for whatever reason, it appeared to be, and then maybe not her intentions, but it appeared to be that my father and our relationship was off limits, if you will. And what I mean by that is that there wasn't a whole lot of interaction from my stepfather, my biological father. I didn't grow up with him, but my stepfather, he was there, very present, awesome and wonderful provider. But there wasn't a lot of hands-on conversation or just talks with him. And I don't know if that was planned purposely. I don't know. But that being said, so growing up, I did not have a whole lot of interaction with other men in the family. I did at times when we were getting together, as family often did, in gatherings and birthday parties, different events. And so the men were there, but it was not a whole lot of interaction. So as far as me growing up and learning to garner a greater understanding that as men, we are to create a stable environment for our household. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to change the environment, but really it starts off with creating an atmosphere. And that atmosphere comes from the inside. And that is mean that we've got to make sure that we are wrangling our emotions in and dealing with the things that we need to deal with as men. And we go through hurts, challenges, just like women do, and that's just a part of life for all of us. And I don't think one pain is greater than the other, be it from the man or the woman, but we obviously deal with it differently. So when we get a hold of this information and really begin to just put it into play, if you will, and it makes me think about the story with Jabez, where he eventually prayed to God and asked God to God, I need your help. And so we don't know, obviously, the entire story, but he was born in a time where there was just turmoil, much like some of us have been brought up in this crazy world today. So, born in a situation, and perhaps his father wasn't there. Again, the Bible doesn't say all of those things, but it's me just speculating because I think at the end of the day, as men, or me growing up, the challenge was understanding my role. And at some point, that prayer may not have been as the same as Jabez, but it was a prayer to God and saying, Lord, I need your help in this. Show me how to become the man that you designed or you desire me to be so I can be that for my family. And whether you, as a man, whether you have a family or not, you've got to get ready for these things. And so that means that as men, we are to create those stable environments for our household. And obviously, before we get to the environment, we got to make sure the atmosphere on the inside is doing what it's supposed to do so that we can create that space for our family.
Great. So, I mean, I love what you're saying. I really do. Um, and I have to be honest, as a single mom of five sons,
Please do. I want you to be honest. This is going to be a great conversation.
so there's a point of contention there.
Mhm.
And I did mention it in my last parenting webinar when I was talking about single parenting and how so many single moms are told, well, you can't raise a man.
Mhm.
And I'm listening to what you're connecting with in terms of how to define manhood and equating that with leadership.
Mhm.
And I think those are a lot of characteristics that
Sure.
are not gender like exclusive.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't think the aspects of a great leader are exclusive to men.
Mhm.
I don't think aspects of what we label as manhood
Mhm.
are necessarily exclusive to men either, because
Right.
what are we really looking for when we talk about, oh, be a man? We're
Mhm.
talking about, okay, have integrity,
Mhm.
have a sense of loyalty and honor,
Mhm.
have a sense of self-respect and respect for other people, being a provider, like all these characteristics that we essentially list out,
Mhm.
they aren't gender specific. um, but we put these types of characteristics, and then again, speaking as a single mom, and I
Mhm.
only have sons,
Mhm.
I've taken offense to people who say, oh, you can't raise a man, because essentially what you're saying is, you are saying no matter what my son does and no matter how hard he works at these things and how great he may be at
Mhm.
exemplifying these characteristics, he's not going to be considered a man because there wasn't a father figure in the
Mhm. Mhm.
in part of his raising, or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's all of my boys. They've
Right.
made
Right.
their own decisions in
Sure.
how they have a relationship with their dads.
Mhm.
But still, I take offense to that, because you're essentially saying, okay, I'm crippling you.
Mhm.
Not that you're actually crippled, but I'm
Right. Right.
crippling you. And then I want you to take this because I
Mhm.
say that's who you should be and that's who you should be limited as. So, I don't know. You see, I'm a little fired up.
Can I have an opportunity to address this? Because this is going to be good. I'm excited about this conversation. Because
Jump
here's the thing,
in.
I, Helen, I absolutely agree with you 1,000%. Words are not gender uh, on a gender basis, if you will. And a woman can be an absolutely wonderful leader, powerful leader, as is a man. So when we use terms like leadership and things of that nature, absolutely, they're not gender based. There's no gender basis to those words. And you are 100% correct on that. So here's the thing. What I've learned from my experience, what I've learned is that there are things that my mom provides that a woman can provide a man, and things that a man provides to his son. And though we're looking at two genders, the different things that they provide are different. They're not the same. And how we deal with certain things as men, and versus how women deal with certain things, again, they're different. They can be drastically different. But when we put them in the space of how the world looks at them, I think for me, I'm looking at it from a more of a biblical space, and that even though leadership, as you mentioned, words of leadership and taking care of children and all those things that we sometimes, or the world has given a gender to, uh, those things are not gender, as you stated so nicely. But there also has to be order at some point, because a woman can be an absolutely wonderful leader, absolutely, and as well as a man can be a leader. But I think there's some things that a man can get from a man gets from his father, as opposed to a man being able to get certain, or he gets something different from his mother. And can a for my personal opinion, can woman raise a man and for him to be fully in a space where he's operating in a place where he's not so sometimes emotional. Sometimes we have, and I'm sure as a therapist you've heard of the term effeminate men, and I'm not saying that's the situation that you're dealing with, but there are a lot of men who have been raised by women, and because sometimes women are, not all, but sometimes women are more emotional, and then so in turn on the flip side, that you get men who will deal with situations from an emotional perspective rather than being from a logical perspective.
Okay, so
I want to come
there's
on.
a
Let's
lot.
do it. Let's do this. I love this.
Oh, we're gonna have the conversation, but I just have to choose a direction. Okay, so I agree with you in terms of leadership,
Mhm,
because I think that's a different aspect of hierarchy.
mhm,
That's a different aspect of respect. I think there's a lot of different words that I can associate with leadership and
mhm,
any type of unit that is going to function as one. And
mhm,
essentially, a family is a unit that's trying to function as one, its own entity, of itself and also within a bigger entity. But yes, there has to be a sense of leadership. Otherwise, there is chaos. That's how you have a sense of order.
mhm.
And, you have your mode of operations, whatever that may be. So I agree with you in terms of leadership. And I think that definitely has to be established.
Mhm.
I think I think where a lot of people get stuck, I think a lot of people get stuck on the idea that because this person is a man, he's a male gender, then he should automatically be the leader.
Mhm.
And I have found in numerous occasions,
Mhm.
maybe he's not. For whatever reason, whether it is his preference, that's not a part of his personality.
Mhm.
He struggles with whatever aspects of it that he may struggle with. But just because you are male or you identify as male, it doesn't mean that you are this born leader. And it doesn't even mean that you want to
Mhm.
become it.
Right, 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 right.
So I think within that, it's being able to identify who
Mhm.
is the leader and
Right.
then having a sense of agreement with, okay, who's leading. And even if it's like you're constantly passing the baton, you
Mhm.
lead in these areas, I lead in these areas. Here are your strengths,
Mhm.
here are my strengths. That's
Right,
perfectly fine. But I think
right.
that a lot of people don't think deeper into it and think,
Yeah.
okay, well, maybe we need to really see who's fitted for which roles.
Absolutely, absolutely. You make perfect sense, Helen, on this. And I think here's the thing, Helen. I think that you are a lot more astute than a lot of other women in this space. You've been a therapist for many years. You're raising five boys, and that's a lot of work in itself. And so I think sometimes we have a tendency, and I know I do, we have a tendency to speak from our own experience. But I think largely, again, you don't necessarily fit into that space where where you are uh, not mindful of the current situations, or again, you're looking at the leadership from a different perspective. And as you said so nicely, again, that leadership and things of leadership, they're not gender basis. There's no base to. It's just anyone can be a leader. And I think as a whole, we all can be leaders. But as I stated again, there has to be order in leadership. And as you stated so nicely, it does not mean that a man is going to be a leader. And I think that maybe even for further clarification, leadership does not necessarily mean that a man is in a household dominating his family. That is not what leadership is about. Leadership is a person first getting through his own turmoil, or his or her own turmoil, that has been designed of their own will or through no understanding of their own. So I think leadership is first us getting through our own challenges that we're all facing, and then, as you say so nicely, there's a there's a phoenix, essentially, so to speak, that arises from the dust and says, hey, you know what, I'm going to take care of this at home, and then you take care of this, honey, and blah blah blah, whatever the case might be. But yeah, I think, obviously there has to be order to it, but yeah, I just think from my perspective, because there's a nature that men, not all men, but uh, typically men are logical. Again, not all men, and more women are so emotional. Not all women are emotional, but my point is that because that is what we deal with. Uh, when you have both men and women, or both men and women trying to lead from a space of that they're both great leaders, there has to be someone that says, hey, you know what, I'm gonna take a back seat to this. I don't need to have my hands in on everything. As opposed to just this last comment here, just as opposed to the man who perhaps have not been shown leadership. I was one of those men that had not been shown leadership, and now because I'm understanding I have a greater understanding, a greater depth of it. Doesn't mean I'm at home dominating my wife and you do this and boss. No, absolutely not. But it does mean that we have decided to set our house up in a way, kind of what you were alluding to earlier. We have just decided to design our household in a way that works for us.
Absolutely. So, I have a list of things, right?
Sure, let's do it. Let's do it. I knew you were writing.
But when you're writing notes.
Yes, yes. I'm getting used to you.
So, okay, so I have to come back to the emotional, rational.
Okay.
I guess I have to call it a dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
Two sides of one coin, if you really look at it. And so the first thing I want to say is, I'm not an advocate of somebody being all one of these things.
Sure.
I think being a human being in general is being able to create your own balance between the two of these.
Mm-hmm.
And you may lean a little bit heavier to the rationale sometimes, and you may lean a little bit heavier to emotional sometimes,
Right.
but both absolutely need to be acknowledged, and they need to be a part of, your path of life. And, I don't know how many years ago I did some sort of leadership training, and a person was talking about how good choices are a mix of the two.
Absolutely.
It's being able to pull out the rational pieces of it, but also being able to take an inventory about how do you react emotionally to the choices in front of you? Because I don't see a point in making choices that make you feel miserable, but according to somebody else, it's the right thing to do, but you're miserable. So how is that right for you if you're miserable? So that's what I wanted to come back to in terms of emotional and rational. And I completely understand there's a lot of socialization that
Sure.
takes place within that, where I have talked to parents who they've talked very differently in regards to their sons versus their daughters. And if their daughter is crying, then they're okay with, oh, it's okay. Cry it out. It's fine. Versus if their sons are crying, okay, wipe those tears off your face and,
Right.
man
Right.
up. And,
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I definitely think there's a lot of socialization. And as you mentioned before, with a lot of boys who are being raised by single mothers, then they get maybe more of that emotional exposure. And then that becomes their socialization,
Right. Right.
and to be more emotional than rational. But again, I just wanted to come back and say, like, I'm not trying to be on one side or the other when it comes to emotional and rational. I really want to encourage people to embrace both sides, because there's value in both sides, and there's a lot of danger when people get all on one side and ignore the
Absolutely.
other. So I'll take a break and you can
Well, no, no, Helen, what you're saying is absolutely powerful. I mean, really, it just makes so much sense. Uh, yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I think there is a huge danger if a man comes in or if a woman comes in. She's more logical than maybe emotional or vice versa. What in the two? There's can be danger in both sides, and so what you're saying makes perfect sense. That there is a balance, and and I think that's what makes it so wonderful because God uses the logic, He uses the emotional side, and when I say emotional side, I'm not meaning that someone is just off the chain and just the emotions going haywire, but speaking of a person who is not leaning to a logical explanation of why they're what they're dealing with or why something happened or just the outcome is more leaning towards their emotions or their feelings, if you will. So that's just wanted to clear that up. So again, I think that we need both. Absolutely, Helen. There's not really a lot that I need to say about that. I think we absolutely need both for the balance. We really do. So you won't get a whole lot of pushback on it. So.
Okay, awesome. But I think there's a lot about this we really are on the same page about. I guess again, I have that passion in terms of being a single mom, raising boys, two men. And I do think my three who are, above 18 and they're
Mhm.
living their own lives, I do think they're exemplary men,
Absolutely.
and I don't, I've never presented it to them that they
Mhm.
are less than because,
Mhm.
their dads weren't involved or whatever role he didn't play or did play. I've
Mhm.
never projected that onto them. And it's always irritated me that other people try to make it seem
Mhm.
that way.
Hmm. Well, Helen, I'm sorry and that people are respond that way because what I'm sharing with you in this conversation is not to imply that they are less than exemplary men. That's not, I hope that's not, been being projected. No, that's not what I'm saying.
Not from you.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, and it's unfortunate, but and I think even with that, and we have to find each of us. We have to find the truth for us, and at some point in our own truth, uh, we're not easily swayed anymore because the proof is that you have exemplary young men or grown men, boys that you raise, and they're just wonderful men. That is the proof. So there is not a question of what anyone else thinks anymore. The results are right before you, and I think it's important for us to to take a stand on that. But no, that's not my stand in regards to uh, women raising boys, meaning that are raising sons and that they can't become great men. That's not my stand. My stand is that when there is a space or things that are missing where you have women who are more emotional than logical, if they themselves have not been uh, raised with a sense of understanding, life from a more logical perspective, it can absolutely become part of the fiber that their sons grow up in, as opposed
Right.
to being that if there was a father in the house, he was more logical. And again, obviously, the opposite can happen is the father was emotional. You can have, or if the woman is leaning towards a more of an emotional part of who she is. And again, it does not mean that logical part is not there, but we as people have a tendency to lean towards, lean more towards one or the other. And obviously, there's for social reasons, and as you mentioned earlier, just kind of how we were raised, how our mother was in the household, or how our father was. And so, but yeah, my stand is not to say that uh, a woman cannot raise exemplary men, but you got a lot of education behind you, a lot of know-how, a lot of understanding than the average person. So I think that's a stand that we have to take on that, because the truth is the truth, and that's just the way it is, and no one gets to rock that boat when we have that understanding anymore.
Right. So thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate it. I hope it wasn't coming off too strong in that area.
No,
Um,
it's all good. It's all good. We're both getting therapy.
Working some things out, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So, um, I mean, there's still more on my list, but I want to
Let's do
focus
it.
in this. I want to focus this moment on balance,
Okay.
because I think that's a huge piece, an underlining piece of what I'm hearing from you when we come back to like the whole emotional rational
Yes.
dichotomy. Um, because what I have seen in so many different clients is, if that person is raised by a very emotional parent,
Mhm.
regardless of it's a mother or father, if
Right,
they're
right.
raised by a very emotional parent, then a lot of times they tend to see that as bad, because they've had whatever adverse
Mhm,
interactions with that
mhm,
parent out
mhm,
of that parent's um, emotional instability.
mhm, mhm.
And so then they grow up feeling like, okay, I have to suppress my emotions and I
Right.
can't be that emotional person. And I want to just be this stoic. It has to be rational and it has to make sense and it has to be
Mhm,
this
mhm.
and that. Um, and then I see the damage, that
Absolutely.
takes place for those individuals. But then also, if they have families, relationships, things of
Mhm.
that nature, then it just kind of spreads out
Right. Absolutely.
into
Absolutely.
people. So and I do understand the pendulum swing, that happens, that
Sure.
if you're raised in this extreme, then you get to a certain point where you go to the opposite end,
Mhm.
believing, okay, well, I don't want to be that because that wasn't good and it didn't
Right.
help
Right.
me, and
Mhm.
I found so much hurt in that. I'm going to be the exact opposite. But the
Right.
problem with being the opposite is you wind up with the same outcome.
Absolutely. 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 I think by default, uh, that the very thing that we, in the most cases, that we're trying to oppose, if you will, or it's kind of, I think what you're alluding to is that if we don't like a certain way that one of our parents were, be the father or the mother, uh, their behavior that they had shown throughout, raising us as children. If we don't like a particular behavior, we can, in our own mind, decide, hey, I'm gonna, like you said moments ago, I'm gonna lean towards this way. But what happens is that because those behaviors are so ingrained in us, we end up, as you said moments ago, we end up going back to the very thing that we have opposed. So I think there's that it's that default that's there, that's waiting for us to I guess maybe perhaps even unconsciously be unaware of what's happening, and we fall into that place of, again, that default place, and we can find ourselves acting just like our mom or our dad. And I think for me, I think perhaps a lot of us may have gone through that very thing. There were things that I didn't like what my mom did or how she handled certain things, and I didn't grow up with my biological father, but nevertheless, I think at some point I had to find my way out of a condition that or a place where I was born at and or born into, and having to find myself as a man. And I say that I'm using it very loosely, Helen. So just wanted to put that out there. But so I had to find myself, just find myself, I guess, really what worked for me. And what worked for me was from a biblical standpoint, a biblical perspective. And again, uh, knowing that I was created in the image and the likeness, after the likeness of God, and that worked for me. And again, not putting myself on a pedestal or higher than anyone else, but it's the place that gives me the confidence that I have right now, and I'm very comfortable in that space.
Awesome. And I think that is huge. And that should be a goal for anyone who
Right.
wants to establish a stable environment, for
Sure.
themselves, for their family, whoever you may be residing with, is having that sense of awareness of
Sure.
what works for you.
Hmm.
Because, like I said before, like it can make total sense to someone else, but if it
Sure.
causes you to feel miserable, then
Mm.
that's not the thing for you.
Right. Right.
So I think that is huge, for people to have that
Mm.
level of awareness of, but what's working for you? And if what's working for you is looking different than what the Joneses are doing, and is looking different than what the Robertsons are doing, and it's like, but if it's working for you, that's where you're going to create the healthiest and the most stable environment for you and the people around you.
Mm.
Um, you also mentioned a different dynamic within that I wanted to kind of touch on because I see the pendulum swing and coming up with the same outcome as different from the dynamic that I heard of repeating patterns.
Mhm.
And we repeat patterns because we repeat what we know. It, you
Absolutely.
know,
Absolutely.
and as much as you may have heard stories and things to do, whether it's through school or talking to friends or other people that as much as you may have heard that, they aren't things that you know. They
Right.
aren't things that you have
Mm.
said, oh, here's step one, step two, step three, step four. This is how you do that thing. So it's kind of like you have an awareness of it, but you don't really know it.
Mm.
So when certain triggers happen, and whatever those triggers may be, it may be a situation, it doesn't mean it's good or bad, it's just a situation. People tend to revert to what they know
Right.
in regards to how do you handle
Mm.
these types of situations.
Right.
And it's not a conscious choice that
Right.
people make. It's like if it's like a recipe. If somebody says, hey, I need you to make a chocolate cake, and you only have one recipe for a chocolate cake,
Right.
that's what
Right.
you're
Right.
gonna do,
Yeah.
and that person be like, well, why did you put this in here and not that? Well, that's what I know to do to make a
Right.
chocolate cake.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's a difference in when it comes
Mm.
to that, when people start noticing, hey, I'm repeating patterns that I really don't like.
Right.
I think it's important for people to empower themselves
Mhm.
and to know that this is just a choice in behavior, and you
Right.
can always choose different behavior. Because I have seen people who take it as a sign, as, oh, I'm acting like my mother, I'm acting like my father, I guess this is my destiny, this is all I
Mm.
can ever be. It's like, no.
Right. Right. Right.
It's there because it's the only thing you know to do in these situations, and the only way that you can know something else is if you start practicing
Mhm.
something else. So
So,
I go ahead.
Helen, I want to stop you. Don't mean to interrupt you, but I have a question for you, though.
Uh-huh.
Now, what happens now when you have an individual who wants to change their behavior, but in changing, now we both know change is not easy. I think the world knows change is a very difficult thing to do. Doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it is difficult to do sometimes to change behaviors. And so sometimes in changing behaviors, my question now is what happens as those behaviors they begin to alter our moods, and then and internally we feel like, oh, this is just too difficult. Does that mean that we stop? Does that mean that that you can't do this thing? Because when you're trying to change your course of action or behaviors, it can be very difficult, but at the same time, it can cause discomfort. So, how what's your take on that?
Okay. So had to put my pen down. Um, First thing that I tell all my clients is the brain perceives change as painful.
Hmm.
And so, of course, we describe it as painful. It's uncomfortable. It's
Sure.
not nice. As you said, it can trigger different mood swings and, emotional reactions to it, because our brains are conditioned for patterns.
Mhm.
Our brains seek out patterns,
Right.
and that's in everything that we do.
Right.
Even I don't know if you've ever had those exercises where they show you a picture of something and something is missing from that picture, but
Sure.
because it's so familiar, your brain automatically fills in the blanks. And
Right.
then you
Absolutely.
don't realize it's not there until somebody else points out, but this not there.
Yeah.
So that's just a little bit of supporting evidence to how our brains love patterns and our brains are drawn to patterns. And so, yes, as soon as you start to change that pattern, your brain is like, wait, hold on a minute. You're making me uncomfortable. I don't know about
Yes.
this. But that is a part of the process. So,
Mm.
part of what I do with my clients is I forewarn them and I tell them, you know what? I don't want you to even start this until you are ready to
Right.
commit to getting through the uncomfortableness of it, because unfamiliar is uncomfortable.
Sure.
Even if the unfamiliar is good for you, even if it's the thing that you said you have been wanting all your life, the fact that it is uncomfortable or it's unfamiliar, it's also uncomfortable.
Sure.
And so there's parts of your physiology that wants to pull away from it and go back to where comfort exists.
Right.
So here's where I definitely encourage people: have your coping skills ready, have your self-soothing techniques ready to where you can acknowledge you feel uncomfortable in that moment, and then you can do some nice things for you to help soothe you and to help calm you down and to help you kind of put this into a different perspective of, okay, this discomfort is temporary,
Right.
and once you get through it, you're going to have this wonderful new thing over here that's going to be so much better and so worth it. But just right now, breathe, stay
Right.
calm, take care of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Discomfort is it's a part of it. Part, as you mentioned earlier, it's a part of the process, and any of us who are desiring to change the course of our behavior or our attitude about something, it's going to take us being uncomfortable. And I like to look at that uncomfortability as being resistance training, if you will. And resistance is absolutely needed in order to build strength, build muscle. And obviously, we're not talking about building muscle, but we are talking about changing our attitudes. And so there is a place where we are building muscle, building insight, if you will, gathering insight, looking at our own behavior as opposed to where we want to go, where we're, what our end goal is. So there has to be obviously an end goal, but there also has to be just that as Helen mentioned earlier, is that having some level of knowing what you're about to get into to some degree, because obviously it can be a new thing for us as we're embarking on change in different areas of our lives, but it is important to really just kind of understand that you're going to be going through a process, and this process is not easy. I like to look at the process um, as a seed being planted, and that there are times that the seed is without water. There's times that the seed just in itself goes through the process in trying to find its way, if you will. And eventually there's growth at some point, but you just have to be patient with the process, be patient with yourself. And as Helen said so nicely, find something that gives you some level of comfort, if you will. Maybe even just having, a spa day, or I'm going to treat myself, blah blah blah, or for whatever reason, I'm going to have ice cream today. I'm going to get up, take one day off my diet or something. I don't know, but just something that's going to really just kind of give your mind a rest, because ultimately it's the information that is in contention with the information that you're with your own habits, if you will, and you're trying to get from point A to point B, and it could be a contentious road, if you will.
Right, right. So, adding to that, self love. It, uh, that's really going to be the medicine on the wound,
Mm,
if the pain reliever, however you want to describe it.
mhm,
But that's what self-love is really going to do for you in this process,
mm,
because you described the process as like a seed growing. I like to describe it as building muscles, because you
sure.
mentioned building muscles,
Yeah.
but I think there's also a very applicable aspect of that. Because if you think of your muscles as these tight knit fibers, and they're
Mhm,
interconnected, and when you go to the gym and you stress those muscles, you strain them, they tear,
mhm,
and they they create space in between those tight knit fibers. And
mhm.
as they repair, they don't go back to this, they don't shrink, they
Right.
build, they fill in the gaps,
Mm,
and that's how you build muscle. And then you go back to the
absolutely.
gym and you tear them again, and then they repair by filling in the gaps. And
Mm,
so that's how I describe it to people. And if you say, okay, as you're going through this process of change, you're tearing those fibers apart. And what you want to fill in the gaps with is self love.
yeah,
Self
absolutely.
love is going to be what comes in and fills in those gaps and
Mm,
makes you stronger and makes you bigger and makes you
yeah.
more than what you have been before. And I know a lot of people are like, okay, well, self love. Everybody's talking about self love, but what is that? How do you do that? And I have a couple of things that I try to share with people. The first thing is never using your words against you.
Hmm. That's good.
That's the first step. Like, you're not going to tell yourself, I'm stupid, I
Hmm.
can't do this, I'm dumb, I'm so weak. Like, you're not going to use your words against you. The second one is the guide of how you're going to use those words. You're going to talk to yourself with kindness, compassion, patience, and gratitude.
Hmm.
And I encourage people to have two statements in each one of those. And for some of my clients, they are struggling so hard with self love. I tell them, if you can't think of any type of statement you can tell yourself that's out of kindness, compassion,
Right.
patience, and gratitude, then just repeat those words to yourself over and over again. Just say kindness, compassion, patience, and gratitude. Kindness, compassion, patience, and gratitude. Just repeat the words.
I just got this visual, but never mind. Go.
Go ahead, share. We're towards the end.
No, 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 I got this visual of this person just say, "I'm kindness, I'm compassion," but no, I'm not. I'm none of those things. So,
Stick with the first part. But I like that. But it is along the lines of, what I want people to take away from this in terms of,
mm,
if you're anyone who wants to build stability in your environment, and you recognize that there are changes that you need to make, because that's another thing that you mentioned. I know I don't really have time to go back to it and get into it, but part of what you stated, Curtis, is that part of being that leadership and creating that sense of stability is working on your own stuff. And
absolutely.
if you're going to work on your own stuff, then that means change is going to have to take place. And
Mm,
that means parts of you are going to get uncomfortable.
sure.
And that means you need self love to help hold you together and to help build you up and make you stronger.
Mm,
So, I mean, that's me kind of summarizing a lot of different places that we went to
right,
today.
right, absolutely, absolutely. And I know as we're wrapping it up here, it's interesting because there is nothing like another person in your life, and uh, even if they don't know you, but as you begin to get to know an individual, and you can, it can be a spouse or a close friend or a significant other. There's no one in life that can help us grow like the other person. And I hope that makes sense. I mean, I think that there are areas sometimes in life where that we may not even necessarily know that we're falling short in a certain area, but the way that I believe that God uses people, He uses people to press those buttons. He uses people to make us very upset with that person. And, oh, why'd you do this? Or again, just to press those buttons that's going to trigger us, as Helen stated so nicely, and that this is a part of all of us, and that it's also part of God's plan that we be made whole. And then being made whole means that, guess what? As Helen so nicely explained, the resistance, that those muscles are being torn, if you will, and creating space. And that when we're tested, if you will, and a lot of times the test comes unannounced, and it may seem like the person is being even malicious about some certain things. But that may not always be the case. Sometimes we just have stuff that, hey, God says it's time to deal with this stuff right now. And those are the things that sometimes, as Helen said earlier, is that we've got to remember to practice that breathing and get back to the gym and and make sure that we're not making the issue about someone else, because in some cases, or in a lot of cases, it's the stuff that we need to deal with. And if we're not dealing with it, we can find ourselves projecting it onto someone else.
Right. Absolutely. Like that can probably be a whole nother episode. Because that's what I tell a lot of people. Like, I work with people who they've been in relationships, they have a breakup, they're like, oh, I'm just going to work on me right now. I was like, that's fine and good. But
Right.
the honest truth is, there are pieces of you that will not come out until there's someone
Absolutely.
else there to
Yeah,
trigger them. So
absolutely, Helen.
there's only so much work you can do on you by
Yes,
yourself. And if
yes.
you really want to be the best version of you,
Mm.
you need somebody who's going to be in that role to trigger them. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to get married. If that's not your thing, it's not your
Right,
thing.
right, right, right.
But but just realizing there are aspects about you that will
Yes,
remain untouched, that will
absolutely.
remain
Mm.
underdeveloped until someone else is triggering them to come out so they can be
Yes,
looked at and they can be worked on.
yes, yes, Helen. Man, I thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. Boy, I found
She was like, no.
I found that there was all kinds of holes in this bread.
Like, you gave me Swiss cheese. What is
Yes. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh yeah, Swiss cheese it is. Absolutely. This not bread.
Right. But we all have those things. But I know we're towards
Absolutely.
the end of our time and just kind of wrapping this up. And I know we have had a very energized
Yes, yes.
discussion tonight. And I hope you, as listeners or viewers, that you have enjoyed this and that you have your takeaways in terms of creating a stable environment for yourself and those around you, being able to face those difficult moments and working through the difficult, painful process of change, and appropriately utilizing self love.
Yeah, there's really nothing much to add to that, Helen. To be honest, it's said perfectly. And what we've discovered is that leadership is absolutely not gender basis. There's no basis to leadership. We can all be leaders, and let's make sure that when we are in that space of leadership, that we're not dominating each other, because that's not what leadership is about. So,
Right. Totally agree. Thank you.
all right, thank you. Ciao, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye.